On the day I should have married her, no one remembered my name. Not even her. I woke up to sunlight crawling across the sheets, golden, familiar. The kind that used to make her whisper, "You look like you belong to the morning." But the bed beside me was cold. The framed photo on the nightstand showed her, alone. No trace of me in her smile. When I called my best friend, he asked who I was. My mother hung up. Even my reflection blinked a half-second too late, like it was thinking before it copied me. Somewhere between the past and the present, I made a mistake. I thought I could fix everything by contacting my past self, to warn him before the betrayal. But instead, I erased myself from everyone's memory. And yet, I think she still feels me. Because lately, she's been losing her mind. My name is Ethan. I've always believed that love is a pattern you can map, something you can preserve if you understand the sequence. Maybe that's the engineer in me talking. But with Lena, every pattern broke. Every rule bent toward her. She was chaos wrapped in color. An artist who painted like she was trying to trap storms inside her canvases. I met her at an exhibit where she stood barefoot, smearing crimson across a wall-sized canvas with her hands, whispering something about bleeding light. Everyone else stared like she was mad. I thought she was magnificent. We couldn't have been more opposite. I lived in code, logic, and symmetry. She lived in noise, mess, and impulse. But somehow, that imbalance worked. I steadied her when her world tilted too far, she loosened me when mine became too rigid. Our apartment was a beautiful kind of clutter, her half drowning in paints and open sketchbooks, mine glowing with monitors and wires. We met in the middle, somewhere between oil stains and code lines. Nights were ours, eating instant ramen on the balcony, watching the city breathe below, her head on my shoulder while she hummed nonsense songs. She used to say, "You're too still, Ethan. I want to paint you in motion." So she did. Once, with dim yellow light bouncing off our walls, she painted both our shadows onto the plaster behind the couch. Two silhouettes, leaning together, hands almost touching. She laughed when I asked why there was a gap. "Because we always leave a little space," she said. "That's where love breathes." I thought I understood her then. I didn't. 2 years later, I asked her to marry me. Nothing fancy, just us on the balcony, rain tapping the railings. She looked at me for a long second, like she was trying to memorize the way I said her name, then she smiled through tears and said yes. We didn't need fireworks. Her laughter was enough. But I kept a secret. At night, after she fell asleep tangled in the sheets, I worked. My monitors flickered with a quiet light, reflecting the lines of code that became my obsession, Mirrorline. A temporal communication interface. My own creation. A bridge between present consciousness and the past self. In theory, it could allow a person to send data, memories, warnings, words, back to their own mind at a precise point in time. It started as a technical curiosity. Then, after a small fight one night, one of those sudden, sharp arguments about nothing that somehow feels like everything, I looked at her and thought, what if love could survive our mistakes? That's what Mirrorline became. My way to preserve us. If anything ever went wrong, if she ever left, if I ever lost her, I could warn myself. Change it. Fix it. She didn't know. She couldn't. Lena always said some things are more beautiful when fragile. If she knew I was building a machine to cheat fragility, she'd call it a betrayal of trust, not a gesture of love. Still, she began to notice my exhaustion. The dark circles, the silence. "What are you building this time?" she asked once, peering at the screens. "Just work," I lied. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Sometimes, when I mentioned the future, she'd go quiet. I'd say things like, "Imagine us, 5 years from now," and she'd look at me with this flicker, like guilt trying to disguise itself as thoughtfulness. Once, while sketching me, she murmured, "You'd still love me even if I wasn't," me anymore, right? I laughed. There's no version of you I wouldn't love. Her hand trembled slightly as she drew. That night, she came to bed late. I heard the soft creak of the door, smelled turpentine on her skin, and when she thought I was asleep, I felt her fingers trace my face like she was memorizing it for the last time. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but I didn't. Because loving her meant accepting her mystery. What I didn't realize then was that love, real love, doesn't need preservation, it just needs truth. But truth was the one thing already slipping between us, unnoticed. And somewhere, deep down, I could feel the first cracks forming, quiet, invisible, inevitable. Still, every time I looked at her, barefoot, laughing, with paint on her arms, I told myself those cracks were just in my imagination. I didn't know yet that I'd already built the weapon that would one day erase me. The week before the wedding, the world began to feel slightly off. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just small misalignments, like waking up in a room that looked the same but smelled different. Lena's laugh was the first thing that changed. It used to tumble out of her, unfiltered and alive. Now, it came out too smooth, too practiced, like she'd rehearsed joy until it no longer fit her. She'd still say the right things. She'd still touch me when she walked by, still kiss me on the cheek in the morning. But her eyes were somewhere else. I told myself it was wedding stress. Everyone says the week before is chaos. Maybe she was anxious about the guests, the dress, the vows. Maybe it was me, maybe I'd been too distracted by work, too obsessed with polishing the last few lines of Mirrorline's code. But then the messages started. The first one appeared on my computer at 3:14 a.m. I'd been debugging a memory sync function when a notification blinked on my secondary monitor. It wasn't from any program I recognized, just a plain text window, white background, black letters. Don't trust her. My heart kicked once, hard. At first, I thought it was a prank, some stray script from a forum, or maybe a system echo from an old test file. But when I checked the metadata, the timestamp read 5 months ago. And the sender's signature was mine. Not my name, my actual encryption key. My identity hash. Mirrorline wasn't supposed to be operational. It wasn't even connected to any temporal link yet. But there it was, a message from me that I couldn't remember writing. I stared at it for a long time before closing the window. I told myself I was just tired. That I'd left a debug note somewhere I'd forgotten about. But 2 nights later, another one came. The day she lies, the clock will reset. This time, I backed away from the monitor like it had burned me. The phrasing, it didn't sound like me. Not the me that existed in the present, anyway. There was something colder, desperate in those words. I felt an echo of dread I couldn't place. I saved the logs, encrypted them, and shut everything down. For the rest of the night, I just sat there in the dark, listening to the sound of rain tapping the windows. Lena was asleep in the other room. I could hear her breathing, steady, soft. I almost woke her up, and almost told her what happened. But I stopped myself. She'd already been distant lately. If I told her I was getting messages from myself, she'd think I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. The next morning, she made pancakes. Burned half of them, laughed, kissed my cheek, and said, "You look haunted." I told her I was fine. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes again. By Wednesday, things were worse. She'd started spending more time in her studio, claiming she needed to capture something before it disappeared. I'd peek in sometimes, she'd be standing there in front of a half-finished canvas, staring like it was whispering to her. Once, I asked what she was painting. She flinched. "Nothing," she said too fast. Then she smiled again. "You'll see." The lie was small, but I felt it. A splinter. That night, I stayed awake long after she fell asleep beside me. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. Then, just as I started to drift off, I heard it. A name. Not mine. She whispered it softly, like it was a secret prayer. Aaron. The sound of it froze me. Aaron, my best friend, my best man, the one who'd helped me pick out the ring, who'd been there the night I proposed. For a moment, my mind refused to believe what I heard. I told myself it was just stress, or a dream, or anything but what it sounded like. But once a seed like that is planted, it grows fast. I barely slept. In the morning, she acted like nothing happened. She hummed while she made coffee. She wore my sweatshirt, smiled at me like I was her whole world. And maybe I still was. Or maybe she was just good at pretending. The next few days were a quiet kind of torture. Every word she said felt weighted, every glance a test I couldn't pass. I started noticing details I'd never noticed before, how she'd check her phone and turn the screen away, how she'd pause before answering simple questions, how she'd flinch when I said, "I love you." She'd always reply, "I know," but lately it sounded like guilt instead of affection. We went to dinner with friends that Friday. She wore the silver bracelet I gave her 2 years ago, the one engraved with our initials. She smiled, laughed, and told stories like she always did. But halfway through the meal, when I mentioned Aaron, just casually, she went still. The laughter dropped from her face, and for a fraction of a second, her eyes darted down. Then she smiled again, too wide. "He's always working these days, huh?" she said. Something inside me cracked a little. I started replaying everything. Every message, every glance, every moment that suddenly looked different under this new light. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. While she was in the shower, I checked her phone. I told myself it was wrong, that I shouldn't invade her privacy, but I did it anyway. There was nothing. No messages, no calls, no signs of anything. Just clean perfection. Too clean. When she came out, I put her phone back and pretended to be asleep. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the person beside me wasn't really there anymore. That she was wearing Lena's skin, but someone, had already taken her away. On Saturday, I went into her studio while she was out buying groceries. The smell of turpentine and oil hit me like a memory. Her canvases were everywhere, half-finished, covered, abandoned. I walked between them like wandering through someone's dreams. That's when I saw it. A painting shoved behind a stack of blank canvases, still wet at the edges. 2 figures. One smiling. One fading. The fading one wore my exact suit, the engagement suit I'd worn when I asked her to marry me. The colors bled into each other, red and gray, like she'd painted with anger instead of brushes. My stomach twisted. My throat went dry. I wanted to believe it wasn't what it looked like, that maybe it was symbolic or some metaphor for love changing. But deep down, I knew. That painting wasn't about change. It was about erasure. I ran my fingers along the wet paint, the outline of the fading man. The colors smeared beneath my touch, blurring his face until it was nothing. Behind me, the door creaked. "Ethan." Her voice. I turned too fast. She stood there, grocery bag in hand, eyes darting from me to the painting. "Why are you here?" she asked, too calm. I swallowed. "What is this?" Her gaze hardened, just for a second. Then she smiled. "It's just a painting. Is it disappearing?" She set the bag down. "You're reading too much into it. You always do. Then tell me what it means." She paused, looking at the canvas, her eyes glassy. "It means," she whispered, "that sometimes love fades before we're ready for it to." Her words cut through me. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, to ask who Aaron really was to her. But I didn't. Because part of me was terrified of hearing the answer. That night, I deleted the Mirrorline files. Or tried to. The system refused. It said, Access denied, active link detected. But I hadn't activated anything. When I checked the logs, the first transmission was already sent, 5 months ago. By me. The same messages. The same warnings. The realization hit me like ice water. Somewhere, somehow, a version of me had already known this moment would come. And maybe, just maybe, it had already begun to repeat. The night before the wedding, I stopped pretending. For a week, I'd been living in a kind of suspended nightmare, half denial, half suspicion, but that night the illusion snapped. I told myself I just needed to know. That the truth, however ugly, was better than this slow bleeding of doubt. It was past midnight. The city outside our window slept, except for the occasional hiss of tires on wet asphalt. Lena was in the shower, humming, soft, distant, familiar. I sat at her desk, her phone in my hand. I'd tried before and found nothing. But tonight, I wasn't just scrolling. I was hunting. I'd written a script, a small decryption tool buried in Mirrorline's framework. It could pull hidden data, deleted messages, cached metadata, things the user thought were gone. When I ran it, her phone flickered once, then filled with lines of code and recovered text. For a second, I almost stopped. But then, the words appeared. Messages. Hundreds of them. Her contact list labeled him as A. Aaron. My best friend. My chest went cold. The most recent message was only 3 hours old. Lena, he's still up working. Same as always. You were right, Aaron, he never looks at me anymore. Only through me. Aaron, that's because you're already gone, baby. Tomorrow, it's just us. He'll never know. Lena, I feel guilty. Aaron, don't. He's obsessed with that project of his. Let him marry his machines. Lena, he said he built it for me once. Some memory thing. Aaron, then he's already living in a dream. Let him stay there. Then, a message from her, time-stamped 2 days ago. Sometimes I think he's not even real anymore. Like he's fading before my eyes. A ghost is waiting. My hands shook. I scrolled further back, weeks, months. There were photos, secret meetings, words that burned through my mind like acid. Every moment of tenderness, every whisper, every promise, it was all a lie built on top of another lie. My stomach turned. I didn't feel anger at first, just a hollow ache. The kind that starts deep in your ribs and spreads outward until it becomes something else. Rage, yes. But also humiliation. I was a fool. The one she laughed about in private texts. The man she'd let paint the future while she erased it behind my back. I don't remember standing up, or throwing the phone. It hit the wall and shattered, scattering glass across the floor. The shower stopped. Ethan, she called out. What was that? I didn't answer. I couldn't. When she stepped out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, I was sitting on the bed, staring at nothing. She froze when she saw the phone. Her expression flickered, fear, then guilt, then something colder, resolve. Ethan, she started, soft, rehearsed. Don't, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the dripping water from her hair, hitting the floor. Was it ever real? I asked. Her silence was the answer. When she finally spoke, it was almost gentle. You always needed everything to make sense. Some things don't. I loved you, I said, my throat tightening. I built the world around you. She sighed. And that's the problem. You built me into it. I never asked for that. You didn't have to ask, I said. You just had to stay. Her eyes softened for a fraction of a second, regret, maybe, but then it vanished. I can't be part of something that rewrites itself every time you're afraid to lose control. She turned away. Just like that. Something inside me broke open. I wanted to scream, to beg, to hate, but none of it came. Instead, I felt something colder, deeper. A clarity born from devastation. If she could lie that easily, then maybe I could too. When she fell asleep, I went to my desk. The glow of my monitors felt almost holy in the darkness. Mirrorline. The interface pulsed faintly, an unfinished heartbeat waiting for permission. I hesitated only once. The messages I'd seen earlier, the warnings from myself, echoed in my head. Don't trust her. The day she lies, the clock will reset. I understand them now. This was a lie. This was the day. I pressed run. The code came alive, threads of light racing across the screen as the system synchronized. I connected the neural bridge, slipped on the electrodes, and felt the hum of electricity crawl beneath my skin. The interface asked. Target timestamp. I typed, -5 months. The same period from which those messages had come. Then. Message. My hands trembled. I whispered the words as I typed them. Don't trust her. The day she lies, the clock will reset. Then, for the first time, I hit transmit. The air around me seemed to shiver. My vision blurred, static crawling at the edges. A pulse of light surged through the monitors, and suddenly I wasn't just looking at the code, I was inside it. For a moment, I saw myself. Not me in this room, but me from 5 months ago. Sitting at the same desk, coding, smiling as a message from Lena popped up on his phone. I reached for him, reached through the static. Listen to me, I said. She's lying. She's going to betray you. He looked up, startled. Who are you? I'm you, I said. From the future. He laughed, at first. Yeah, sure. Another Mirrorline simulation, right? You're not real. She's not who you think she is, I said, my voice cracking. It's Erin. She's been with him for months. His face shifted, disbelief turning to something darker. Prove it. I sent the data, the messages, the photos, everything I'd found. I watched his eyes widen as the truth hit him. Then he looked back at me, horrified. If this is real, then, what happens to us? I don't know, I said. But we have to stop it. He nodded slowly. Then we fix it. We send her away, we. And that's when the system screamed. An error flashed across both timelines. Warning paradox detected, timeline overlap initiated. I tried to abort the sequence, but the command didn't respond. The room shook, no, reality shook, fracturing like glass. The lights flickered, screens warped, and I felt a violent pull, like being yanked out of my own skin. My past self shouted something, then the connection collapsed. The monitors went dark. I gasped, ripping off the electrodes, stumbling backward. My head pounded, my vision doubled. The room looked the same. But something felt wrong. Too quiet. I reached for my phone. No notifications. No photos. My contacts list was empty. I rushed to the bedroom, Lena was gone. The bed was untouched. Confused, I grabbed my jacket and ran outside. The streets looked the same, but when I reached the cafe where we always went on Saturdays, the barista didn't recognize me. I called Erin. The number didn't exist. By the time I reached our apartment again, panic had turned to dread. Every trace of me, every digital record, every photo, every message, was gone. I searched my name online. Nothing. When I looked in the mirror, for a moment, the reflection didn't move with me. It lagged, half a second late, like it was trying to remember how to be me. I whispered my name out loud just to hear it. Ethan. The sound felt foreign. Then I heard laughter outside, familiar, haunting. I looked out the window. Across the street, Lena was standing there in a white dress. Aaron beside her. Guests gathered around them. Balloons. Cameras. Music. A wedding. Our wedding day. Only this time, it wasn't ours. They were smiling, radiant, alive. The crowd cheered as Aaron kissed her. And me? I stood in the window, invisible. Forgotten. I tried to shout, but no sound came out. When I looked again, no one was there. The entire scene had vanished, like a mirage. That's when I understood. The paradox didn't just send a warning, it rewrote everything. It removed the variable that caused the fracture. Me. I had warned my past self, and in doing so, I'd made myself obsolete. I didn't just lose her. I lost existence itself. Now I wander through the remnants of a life no one remembers, a ghost caught between timeline. And somewhere, in a reality I can't touch, she's standing beside the man who took my place, smiling the same smile she once gave me. The betrayal wasn't just love lost. It was the universe itself deciding she was real, and I was not. Being erased doesn't feel like dying. It feels like standing in a clear room while everyone else walks around you as if your body is a rumor. You can see their hands move. You can hear their voices. You can even touch the furniture, but no one feels the pressure you leave. That was the first week, pure, raw absence, just the ache of wanting to be recognized. After that, something colder grew. Recognition isn't a mercy. It's a weapon. I learned their new life the way one learns a book by smelling its binding, from a distance, from public scraps. Gallery reviews. A friend of a friend's Instagram. A clip of Lena laughing at an opening, a flash of her hand holding a wineglass, the silver bracelet I'd bought dangling from her wrist. They wrote about the haunting presence in her work, how her figures seemed to remember a man who was never painted. Critics loved it. Fame moved in like a slow tide. She used the absence. She sold it. Watching her ascend felt like watching someone climb over your bones. At first, I tried to be humane. I told myself that if she was happy, the world had made a cruel correction but not an unbearable one. Then came the nightmares she couldn't place, snatches from other people mentioned in interviews. Sometimes I hear him, she'd say, voice flat, a voice telling me about promises. That should have been closure. Instead it was the beginning. Her work changed. The canvases became noisy with black scratches and crowded shapes. Her bright colors dulled into palettes for grief, deep indigo, burnt umber, the gray of ash. The critics called it evolution. I called it rot. The faces in her paintings began to lack mouths. The eyes were smudged into blind crescents. In gallery photographs, people would trace those empty faces with their eyes like readers following familiar words. She wrote about inspiration, about being touched by a phantom. She won awards for it. The more they praised her, the more she trembled at night. Fame gave her a stage but no language for the nameless thing that haunted her sleep. She began to dream of a faceless man who whispered, "You promised forever," and woke clutching her sheets, raw with a guilt she couldn't remember committing. Watching from the margins, because that was all I could do, I realized two things at once. The first, obvious, Lena was unraveling. The second, darker, Mirrorline was still a tool, and I still had the only key. Mirrorline had been built as a bridge, now it would be a blade. Not because I wanted her to suffer, the thought of her pain sickened me, but because she had been handed back a life in which I was a ghost and felt nothing but entitlement. She'd stolen me of my name, my history. If the world could be rewritten by a single paradox, then reversing her certainty felt like justice. It was petty. It was correct, in my coldest hours. I never touched the system the way I had when the lines of code were my comfort. I couldn't write a manifesto or a set of instructions. I wrote fragments, memory triggers, shards of sensation, echoes of things only she and I had known. I thought of them as small knives, a song we used to hum in the dark, the particular way I would brush a freckle from her shoulder, the pattern of a joke she always laughed at 3 in the morning. Each was harmless on its own. Together they would be a chorus she could not ignore. I didn't send them wholesale. I seeded. A note here, a misplaced lyric there, glitches that looked like coincidence. A flicker in a gallery slideshow that flashed an image of us for a heartbeat and then became a landscape. An email from a supposed fan that quoted a line from our private joke. Old songs would play in cafes she passed, always the ones we twisted into something intimate. Sometimes I made her feel a touch, a phantom brush at the back of her neck, nothing tangible, but enough to make her pause at a crossing and look over her shoulder. Let me be clear, I did not hack people's devices as a how-to manual could teach. This is fiction, and I will not walk you through techniques. In the world of the story, Mirrorline allowed me to slip small, impossible things into the edges of her perception. It is the difference between "I forgot" and "I can't forget." The first triggers were almost playful. She would stop mid-interview and stare at nothing, frown, and say, "I know this song," then laugh it off. Aaron would steady her and smile like a man who had never once been afraid. But the play became insistent. Patterns formed. She began to wake from studio naps whispering our old pet name. She'd find small things she insisted she'd placed, my old watch, a feather from a scarf, we never owned. She would blame herself. Aaron would say, soothing, "You're stressed. It's the pressure." He'd touch her arm. The touch looked rehearsed to me, it had the weight of an actor remembering a line. Aaron noticed, too. At first he joked, then he became protective, then defensive. He started showing up at openings with forced joviality. He would introduce her at shows, his arm around her waist like a man flaunting his victory. Yet sometimes, in the late frames I watched on loop, his smile slipped. Once, in a grainy clip after a toast, he lingered at the side of the room, watching Lena as if he could see through her to something that menaced her. Guilt operates in strange ways. Even he began to suspect that the world had given him a prize built on sand. I kept a record. I told myself I was a scientist, observe, log, test. I wrote the way my father kept account books, cold, unforgiving. Trigger 3, song at cafe, reaction, jaw clench, stare 4.2s. Trigger 7, photo glitch, she swears it's real. Tracking made me feel alive. It also made me accountable for what I was about to do. There were setbacks. Sometimes the triggers did nothing, sometimes they made Lena laugh and grow fonder of the phantom that had become part of her mythology. Once, a trigger backfired, and instead of confusion, it fed her fame. An intimate memory leaked into a profile piece and became the opening line of a feature, the artist who paints the love she cannot remember. The story sold more tickets. I wanted to smash the paper into dust. Reality is stubborn. So is conscience. It crept up on me in quiet moments, like when she stumbled in the street after a show and I wanted to catch her although she would never see me. Guilt sounded like advice: if you destroy her, what does that make you? If she broke, what would that say about me? Would I be a casualty of grief or its architect? There were nights I almost stopped. I sat by the window and watched Lena through a courtyard across 2 blocks, hair in a bun, shoulders hunched, muttering to herself as if rehearsing apologies to no one. I felt a sick tenderness that grew in my teeth. I imagined walking into her studio, grabbing her wrist, telling her everything, spilling the truth and taking the consequence. That was the humane choice. It was a coward's choice too. Telling her would have been to stand and accept erasure, to hand her a memory with a price. The tipping point arrived not in a plan but in an image. I was watching a recorded interview of Lena at a retrospective, her voice flat, eyes glassy, when the camera cut to one of her paintings, herself, alone, smiling above a dark mound with a name scratched into the paint like a gravestone. I froze. The painting was a self-portrait, but not as she imagined herself, rather, as she had been imagined by the world, triumphantly over a dead thing. She looked out of the canvas, triumphant, serene, and my name was a smudge beneath the mound. It was the most personal thing she'd ever painted, and it felt like a knife with my face on the handle. That image pushed me past the moral cliff. Seeing her ready to smile over my absence like it was a coronation made me understand the cruelty of waiting. If she could picture my death and be pleased, nothing could be left to negotiate. So I hardened. No more fragments. No more tests. I would construct a maze that only she could get lost in, one that kept her from ever believing the world's tidy narrative that had erased me. I would plant doubts deeper than fame could patch. I wrote to the past and to the present, not with commands, but with memory crumbs, with private jokes, with the particular cadence of our laughter. I made sure the triggers had weight, the right melody at the wrong hour, a perfume she had once hated tucked into a coat she would always find, a message from a non-existent friend. That quoted our conversation word for word. In public, it looked like a coincidence. In private, it was a steady drip. Aaron noticed the shift. He started arguing with Lena in whispers, sharp exchanges about reality, about boundaries. Once, in a video I watched 10 times, he grabbed her hand and begged, "Please stop with the ghosts." The shame on his face was almost as satisfying as the ache I felt watching him fail. She began to break in ways that made headlines. She slammed her palms against mirrors and screamed, "I can't hear you." And later, on a quiet terrace, she confessed to a late-night radio host, voice thin, "Sometimes I remember a man who wasn't there, and it makes me ashamed." The public loved the tragedy. The private withered. I recorded everything, not out of triumph but because I needed proof that I wasn't inventing my own revenge as I went. I played back nights and mornings, froze frames until the edges blurred, and watched the shape of her decline like a study. The scientist in me catalogued guilt, increase in self-medication, decreased sleep, recurring tremor in her left hand when she painted mouths. The man in me catalogued a different thing, the satisfaction of seeing a woman who had once smoothed over my existence finally feel the loss with teeth. She took my reality, I wrote in a file titled Echoes. I'll take hers. That sentence looks monstrous on a page. It looked necessary to me in the dark. And then, in a small, awful moment, I saw the painting, Lena's self-portrait, displayed in a late-night studio video, the same one I had seen earlier, now fully revealed. She was smiling over a mound. I froze the frame. The brushwork was almost gentle. The mound, my absence, was detailed. The face she drew above it had a satisfaction I could not unsee. She painted me dead and smiled like it was deserved. Something in me closed then. Whatever threads of mercy remained were cut. I understood, with a terrifying clarity, that what I was about to do would not be undone by apologies. She would remember me in pieces for the rest of her life, and those pieces would be my offering and my sentence. I didn't take joy in that clarity. I took a job. I set a plan into motion, steeling myself against the reflection in the dark monitor that looked for approval and found only a silhouette it no longer recognized. The revenge would be surgical, personal, corrosive in ways the public couldn't trace. I would haunt the life that had been given to her, not by breaking things she needed, but by returning what she'd been spared, memory, in its most intimate form, until she could no longer stand the weight of remembering what she had done. And when she finally painted the portrait where she smiled over my grave, I folded that image into my chest and sealed my decision. There are always last moves. The gossamer threads you've been pulling finally knot into one hard cord. For months I'd been sewing memory into the edges of her life, tiny, precise stitches. The final phase had to be a cut. Mirrorline wasn't built for what I would ask it to do. It was never supposed to press against another mind the way I planned. But I had learned its seams. I had learned how to slip things in where they would fester and grow. I did not describe the method in files I left behind, that's not how this reads as a story. In the story, there is only the ache and the moment where the hammer falls. I chose the date carefully, what would have been our first anniversary. A day for vows and small, comfortable rituals. A day where the memory I once owned would have been loud enough to drown out everything else. They scheduled a gala at the gallery for Lena's new series that week. She would be lauded. Aaron would stand at her side, proud. The audience would be filled with people who would applaud her success and never wonder how the applause tasted to me. I wrote one message. Simple. Clean. He will betray you first. Don't let him. I set the timestamp to 1.5 years in the past, the point where she still loved me without reservation, before the compromises, before the erosion. Mirrorline trembled as I pushed the transmission through. I pictured her reading it, imagining the way her fingers would hover, the way she'd bite the inside of her cheek when something heavy landed in her lap. Then I sent it. The effect was not instantaneous. The past is not a TV you can change with a remote, it twists at its edges and sends new shapes forward. But there was a crack. A fissure formed in Lena's mind like frost on glass. The messages I'd seeded before, our song in a cafe, a phantom caress, began to line up with the new, more violent echo from her past. Different versions of the same truth collided inside her head. She started to remember things that didn't belong to the version of herself living in the present. In private interviews she would pause as if listening to an answering voice, and then tell the host, out of nowhere, I had a husband. Or I thought I did. I don't know. She'd laugh as if that made sense. It did not take long for the laughter to thin. On the morning of the anniversary, the city was warm and thick like honey. The gallery smelled like new paint and perfume. I watched her from across the street through the slotted blinds of a building that did not belong to me. Lena moved through her guests with the poise of someone performing grief for applause. She smiled at cameras, hands steady, shoulders straight. But the cameras caught more, a beat where she looked past Aaron, searching the room as if a phantom should be there, then flinching when she found nothing. I had placed enough echoes inside her that her past and present started to argue. One version told her she'd been betrayed. Another insisted nothing had happened. The messages I sent to her past brought a new certainty into the mix. He will betray you first. Don't let him. The temptation to act, against a man she thought might betray her, was a powerful thing in a woman already sleepwalking between eras. I watched the first collapse happen in slow motion. She was on stage, smiling during a toast, when the sound of laughter cut into her face like static. Her eyes darted to the wings. She mouthed a name, my name, and the crowd didn't know who she meant. Someone in the front row thought it was performance art. Someone else pulled out a phone to capture the moment. Ethan, she screamed. It was not a laugh. It was a raw, animal sound that ripped the polished air to pieces. 100 frames froze, patrons shifting, flashbulbs popping, a champagne flute tipping and spilling like a small comet. In the panicked hush, the gallery felt cavernous. Erin's face went pale in a way I had never seen before. She kept screaming my name, louder and louder, words tumbling into each other. You lied, Ethan, where are you? He lied to me, he lied. No one could answer. No one could because no one knew me. Reporters thought she was having a breakdown. A curator tried to lead her off stage. She shoved him away like a woman shaking off a sleep paralysis demon. Someone knocked over a candle on a display table. Wax spread like ink. Flames licked the edges of a curtain. Panic became immediate and then theatrical, curators yelling, guests fleeing, the sprinklers stuttering and then failing to catch the blaze. My plan did not require fire, but fire is a good amplifier of chaos. It gives heat to the public imagination, and Lena had already become a story everyone wanted to tell. In the smoke and emergency lights, she kept shouting, at me, at no one, at the idea of me. You said I was replaceable, I heard her say, as if the room itself were listening for a confession. The phrase fell like a guillotine through the smoke. People around us coughed and stumbled, clutching coats and phones. Erin's voice rose, raw and pleading, trying to pull her into safety. He had never been so small. I moved closer, no one saw me move. I have never been closer to her than in that instant, heat washing the lower rows of the gallery, the smell of burned varnish and wet paint. Her eyes found a blank square of wall as if it were an altar, and she pressed her hands to it like someone trying to hold on to a memory that is slipping. She looked right at me, through me, her face wet with tears and streaks of paint she was not aware of, and said, clearly, "You said I was replaceable." For a second, my rage and grief and all the slow corrosions of the last year condensed into a single point. I stepped forward and spoke with a voice I had never used for a public performance. I did not yell. I did not plead. I said the thing she had said to me, slow enough that the smoke and screaming could carry it. Now, so are you. Maybe someone caught it on a live clip. Maybe it became a caption. Maybe it didn't. None of that mattered. What mattered was how her face changed. I watched the life drain from her look in a way that was near to religious. It was not triumph that took her then but the recognition of consequence. She realized, too late, that the erasure she had celebrated had a temperature. As the alarms wailed and firemen unrolled hoses, one of her paintings caught flame, an abstract of blank faces I had always joked would be her career in full bloom. It buckled and sagged and then blazed, a dark mouth opening. People gasped. Someone shouted about art vandalism. Aaron shouted her name over and over as if he could stitch her back to a version of reality that would forgive him. She fell to her knees in the middle of the gallery floor, hands lifted to her face, and the world became a place of shards and noise. She was not the woman who had smiled over my grave. She was smaller, more human. And she sobbed, not for what she had lost, but for what she had done. Later, the papers would call it a breakdown. The pundits would do what pundits do, name symptoms, link them to fame, pathologize. Art forums would debate authenticity. The viral clips would add a flourish, a soundtrack, a meme. But none of that captured what happened in that smoke-filled room when Lena's hands clawed at a painting as if trying to rip my name back into the world. When the fire was finally out and the galleries were cordoned off, there was a quiet moment where she sat on the steps, hair singed, a smear of paint across her cheek. She looked like someone who had been exhumed. The ambulance people murmured. Aaron sat at a distance, trembling. I watched her lift a charred canvas, her last piece from that night, and reveal, beneath the scorched black, an image that had not been visible at first, a faceless man holding a clock. The clock's hands had been carved out, and where the man's face should have been, there was only an absence, a hole in the painting like a missing photograph. She set the painting down like a confession. She stared at it as if it was the key to everything and then laughed once, a thin, broken sound. "You wanted to keep time," she whispered to nobody, "so I gave you empty hours." Then she looked straight at the canvas and, for the first time in months, said my name without a question. "Ethan," she said. "Where are you?" I had no answer that would fit in any language. So I watched instead, and somewhere in the ash and heat and public reckoning, I felt something close to the thing I'd wanted all along, her attention, ragged, wounded, real. It is strange to feel satisfaction at the precise moment someone you loved collapses. It is stranger still to feel guilt alongside it, like two old friends arguing in your chest. I had planned the haunting so carefully, but I had not planned how small it would make me feel when it finally happened. I had not planned for the whispers of my own voice afterward, asking if I had saved anything at all, or simply ruined a life I had once tried to protect. When they took her away, an ambulance swallowing her scream, I stood in the distance, invisible as always. The painting remained on the pavement, faceless man, clock with hollow hands. People photographed it. Reporters wrote their headers. Aaron was left to answer the questions of a public that demanded explanations. I left before dawn. The city was quiet, smeared with smoke. The wound I had opened was raw and hissing. In my pocket, a file blinked, a log of triggers, timestamps, and the final message I had sent. I backed it up to a drive and encrypted it. I told myself I would never use Mirrorline again. As I walked away, the image of the faceless man holding a clock stayed with me. It was not a picture of my victory. It was an indictment. I had carved out a face of my own when I erased one. I had set the hands of time to zero for someone else because my hours had been stolen. The revenge had been executed. The consequences would unfold for years. I had wanted her to feel what I had felt, emptiness, erasure, the terror of non-existence. She would feel it, I knew that then. But I would carry it too, in a way that would never let me forget the shape of the man I had become. In the smoke, while the city cuffed itself back together, a line of words from the past replayed in my head like a broken record. She had once told me, in a softer moment, we leave a little space. That's where love breathes. I had filled that space with an absence. And now it was breathing. The world feels quieter now, like the air is holding its breath. I walked through her apartment one last time. The doors unlocked, it always was. The walls are bare except for soot-stained outlines where her paintings once hung. The scent of turpentine lingers, mixed with something softer, lavender and old smoke. On her table sits the charred canvas, the faceless man holding the clock. I trace the edge where the fire stopped, where the absence begins. It feels warm, as if time itself still hums inside. In the corner, my reflection stutters across the darkened window. Sometimes I see myself. Sometimes I don't. I'm not sure which is worse. I opened my laptop, the same one that built Mirrorline, the bridge that cost everything. The code looks foreign now, like something written by another man. I select delete. The cursor blinks once, then nothing. The hum of the machine fades. For the first time, the silence feels complete. I look at the city below, alive, uncaring, beautifully indifferent. She's out there somewhere, lost between timelines and memories, painting with hands that tremble when they remember too much. I whisper to the empty room, not for her, but for me. She forgot me to survive. I reminded her to die remembering.